interesting question on the whys. I can't even remember the order. And then, of course, we had a professor from Birmingham who talked about the continuous resistance and the struggle, Professor Andrews, and his book on Black 21st Century Resistance. We had our lady from South Africa who talked about the economics. What are we doing today? Are we getting off our backside and helping each other move forward? She doesn't want to be here next year in this position. We had Lady Stanford, who actually touched on what I consider a lot of the relevant things to our society today. And that is something I want to touch on today, about the discourse between being black and being African, especially from the diaspora in this country. Okay? Farouk, who's come from Nigeria, I beg your pardon, from Ghana, please forgive me. As well as there was an introduction of another politician in the room. And I think it's relevant that we've got 1, 2, and 3 politicians. He's my MP for Reading West. So I've met him before. But one of them, for me, what was the most interesting thing is to understand Black history. What is this about? What the why question? Who brought together this whole Black history thing? When did it start? And very simple reading on my part, came up with a guy called Carter G. Woodson, who in 1926 made an interesting statement. And it's the statement I just want to touch my 3 minutes on. Okay? He said, if a race has no history, it has no worthwhile tradition. It becomes a negligible factor in the thought of the world, and it stands in danger of being exterminated. The American Indian left no continuous record. He did not appreciate the value of tradition, and where is he today? The Hebrew keenly appreciated the value of tradition, as is attested by the Bible itself. In spite of worldwide persecution, therefore, he is a great factor of our civilization. Now there's 3 things I'd like to dissect in this statement. One is about tradition, and the next is about value, and the third and most interesting one is about religion, because he talks about the Bible and longevity. If a race has no history, Carter G. Woodson, former descendant of the North Atlantic slave trade, comes from a tradition where for 400 years of slavery he's looking to find himself. We find ourselves here today as members of that diaspora created by slavery, and people who have direct descendancy from Africa. What is this history that he was chasing? What is the history that we are chasing? And how does it relate to where we are today? For me, the really important things are, we are struggling in a society where Professor Phillips says 50% black youth unemployment in Birmingham. The figures are very similar. I had 42% here in London, which have got no bearing on the national average, which in the 19 to 25 age group is as little as 19%, if they're not in part of the gig economy. What is it that these kids are lacking? And if you ask me, it's a clear understanding of positive history. All that they know today is the strife. Is this, we've been in a fight. And the question is, we are citizens, but do we belong? Okay? And do we have positive history to share with them? That's the real question.
Yes, of course we do.
Where do we share it with them? The professor has been good enough to lead today a study course in Birmingham University. But it's the beginning of something. We need to press our dear minister here on how do we get positive history brought into the education system to leave a positive impact on our children.
Exactly.
During the slavery period, we had a whole host of very powerful, very active African leadership. No one knows anything about them. You know, the likes of Mshweshwe from South Africa, the likes of Shaka Zulu and his predecessors being Swayo. I'll talk about these because I'm from Southern Africa. But that's not where it starts or ends. We had, prior to that, we had extremely powerful empires in Africa. The Songhai, the Mali, the Bakongo, we talked about that. These were all hotbeds for what became the slave trade. But guys have no power, no understanding of how positive these empires were, what they represented at the time. We produced a person who today is regarded as the richest man who's ever lived.
Mansa Musa.
Mansa Musa. They've estimated that if they unraveled his value, his wealth today, it'd be worth 400 billion. But we know nothing about him. There's nothing positive that's brought into the system to get our kids on what I consider the rightful path. And that's what we need to use this forum for. One thing really disturbing was to hear from, I beg your pardon, the barrister. Please forgive me, I forgot his name. Yes. The fact that they're looking at amalgamating Black History Month with diversity.
Let's start it.
Guys, do you understand the real difference between what those agendas represent? And where it's so important that we get positive influence impacted on our kids today. I'm not going to talk about the history of black people and all the positive stuff because I can take you back all the way to how we influence religion in its current shape and form. How we influence the shape of Christianity. Christianity didn't come via the Hebrew. It came via Constantine. Okay? And the whole concept of a divine deity born of immaculate conception was derived thousands of years before it was presented to the Jewish people. And it's all 100% black Africa. Guys, so my message is very uncomplicated. What are we going to do next year to ensure that my dear lady is not frustrated by our lack of progress? What are we going to do to ensure that Professor Andrews can get out of this "we are nothing but a struggling bunch"? We got to get our kids thinking straight. We've got to educate them. We've got to impose positive influence. But most importantly, as one African people, guess what? As a diaspora, especially those who come from the slave background, you actually have no direct allegiances to whether you are Igbo, Yoruba, whether you're Shona, or otherwise. You actually can lead us in a direction for the rest of us to follow. Because Africa has always been divided by our 3,500 different tribal groups and languages. It's not going to change.
No, very true.
But guess what? We can change in the diaspora. Thank you.